Pixar's 2009 release of Up saw pretty instantaneous success. The film is super highly regarded with some incredible critical acclaim. It also just so happened to create one of cinema's most iconic pieces of imagery within the 21st century so far. It grossed a whole lot and won so many awards despite 2009 being a very competitive year in the world of animation, and even happened to snag a nomination for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, as only the second animated feature to achieve such grandeur. While receiving the substantial recognition it has wouldn't typically be grounds for labeling something as underrated. I've noticed even way back when the feature was new, there were claims that Up sees a dip in quality throughout the second half of the film. I don't believe this line of thinking to be true in the slightest, though I know it's in part due to how emotionally gripping the opening married life sequence is, and how many would say it's among the best scenes the studio has produced. In today's video, however, I'd like to call attention to the latter half of the movie, which has seemingly become more overlooked, and doing so by highlighting what is, dare I say, the most underrated component of the entire film. Our primary antagonist and the world's greatest explorer, Charles F. Muntz, is the topic of this video, and I want to take a deeper dive into what makes him work so well as a character and how his contribution to the story is still overlooked after all these years. Up, which follows Carl Fredricksen as he deals with the loss of his wife, Ellie, by taking their home and belongings to Paradise Falls, a place the two had dreamed about since their youthful encounter, doesn't show our main characters come in contact with Muntz until nearly an hour into the film. Charles Muntz is a legend as seen in the film's prologue, traveling all around the world in his massive Zeppelin, though as we see he's essentially cast aside for believing he's seen the mythical snipe. He promises to find this mighty bird and return it home when he does. So he sets off to Paradise Falls and he spends nearly the next roughly 60 plus years on this conquest. But for young explorers like Carl and Ellie, his motto, "Adventure is out there," can still echo through a lifetime. As we know, Muntz is the primary antagonist of the film, and when he shows up on screen, the audience shouldn't expect otherwise, considering he's after Kevin, the snipe now in close ties with Carl, and more so his trusty wilderness explorer companion, Russell. Carl has dreamed of Paradise Falls because of this man, and that's why he took his house there. They have one pleasant encounter at first, which quickly fades the moment Charles thinks his glory is being restrained by these new visitors. Muntz is honestly a pretty sympathetic character at first. He's dedicated his entire life to this task. He didn't allow himself to return to his home until it was complete, so it just built up even more in his mind. That sympathy is quickly withdrawn as the metaphorical skulls of his contesters are brought to the light, and the chase begins. We've already established villainy here, so beyond some of his extreme actions, Charles can represent a perfect parallel to Carl at this point in the film. The house that's tied around him represents in his mind the final remaining connection to Ellie, leading to him personifying it as her along with the additional belongings and furniture within it. Muntz similarly is carrying around this baggage, these reminders of his glory days, through trophies in a grand hall, which can only add to his developing bitterness. Side note, considering he's been up there for 60 to 70 years, there was a deleted idea for the film, which showed how Muntz made the talking dog collars, and more interestingly, how he was able to slow down aging or something of that sort, perhaps tied to the snipe. I don't think that would have been entirely necessary. Muntz is an old guy, which I feel is enough, but Kevin as a plot point also just works with or without these mystical features all the same. I was always a little confused when I was younger how old Charles was, but it makes sense for him to be in his 90s. He seems to be active too, so it checks out. Being that Carl and Charles are both dealing with some aspects of their life, kind of consuming them in a way, in a wonderful exploration of grief through Carl's story, he's able to reflect through Muntz, who's now expressed decades of resentment. Carl started on this sort of darker path as he attacks the man who touched his mailbox. And though he quickly expresses contempt for his own actions, he commits to the basis of said actions when he takes his house, so no one else can tear it down. Just like Carl after losing Ellie, Muntz also hasn't let any other people into his life, aside from his dogs, but even those he seems to have sacrificed, which he does at the very least seem remorseful about. The parallel between these two is beautifully illustrated as Russell and Carl stand beside a captured Kevin, and Muntz approaches the Fredricksen residence, lighting it ablaze. At this point, Carl is on the same journey he's been throughout the course of the film. He cares about the house, so he lets Muntz get what he's been working so hard to do for a lifetime, to the dismay of his new companion. It's at this point Fredricksen goes through his own revelations, and Kevin can represent a new life, a new way of thinking, and growth towards who Ellie would want him to be. The only problem is now he's directly contending Charles Muntz, when their initial disputes were accidental, circumstantial perhaps. So eager to clear his name of being a fraud, Muntz is ready to drop a child 40,000 feet in the air. Luckily, Carl didn't entertain that idea too heavily. Just as Carl had to part with a lot of his homely belongings, Muntz's tokens and mementos of exploration end up getting destroyed, only at his own hand as the Elder Showdown commences. Charles is really standing so heavily on business throughout this whole sequence. There's a lot of intensity as they scale the spirit of adventure, which is awesome because it's just an old man chasing a younger old man. I love it. When he gets to the top and pulls out a gun that must have been stowed away somewhere, he finally does look the part. Just like Joe Garner, who I talked about in the last character breakdown, he's very tunnel-visioned with this goal. Nothing else he's accomplished matters. It's a tragic downfall for his character. Or maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. He completely avoids a petrified Carl while blasting away at his house, and has now mentally scarred this 9-year-old boy multiple times in the last hour and starts pulling a Jack Nicholson in The Shining. As he lures himself into a plummeting destination, he sees a brisk decline. Seeing the fall of his childhood hero obviously has some effect on Carl, but he and the audience could obviously see his derangement over this whole ordeal. We know he takes the late explorer's aircraft and eventually sells it before the events of Doug Days, but I do wonder how telling the tale of this situation or how he stumbled upon such a vessel to anyone back at home went. Like, there's really no way they could keep this entire encounter a secret with hundreds of talking dogs now roaming the States. It is interesting to consider that had Russell not spilled the beans about the knowledge of this snipe, maybe the whole altercation would have been avoided. But I assume Muntz was at least a tad bit out of it, all things considered, so he probably would have found some way to express his resent eventually. The film's exposition can assert how Muntz's life story went. We can fill in the dots to see how he got to the points that he did. While he's obviously used as a tool to take Carl's growth from one point to another, he is really able to chew up the scenery, feeling such a strong presence whenever he is on screen. This tool is just naturally good storytelling, though, that ties in the beginning of the film, which is so beloved, and it really goes on to make every moment that came before so much more impactful to the characters and the audience. You can isolate these two components and they're both engaging in their own right, but together they are that complete pie, and that's the best way to serve it. I think Muntz has become a little forgotten for a few reasons. For one, he's one of Pixar's least showy antagonists. And by that I mean the studio has so many different worlds and environments in which their stories are told. Charles is just a guy, and he doesn't have any supervillain attire to recall attention. Because of this, Disney has opted to not really produce much merchandise of him, despite Up having big collections released year after year. Muntz also just doesn't appear in any exterior aspects of the film like movie posters, DVD, Blu-ray covers, so he barely exists in any media outside of the film itself as of now, which isn't always the worst thing, but it's weird for a major Disney Pixar release. And as previously alluded to, aside from some of Doug's notable quips and the existence of Kevin, I feel that Up is remembered for the opening married life sequence and the house taking off, though I can only hope that this video can remind people who haven't watched the movie in some time of some of these other aspects. I've done a lot of talking though, so let me know what you think about Charles F. Muntz. I'll drop the middle initial now, I guess. Is he a good character, a good villain for that matter, and does he elevate this movie? Let me know what you think in the comments down below and what characters you'd like to see me talk about in the future. I'd like to thank you all for watching. As always, I love making these videos, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.